The story begins with Sung Jin-woo covered in blood holding up his sword as a group of stone statues walks toward him. As the statue attacks, we flash back to how Sung Jin-woo got there. We see a construction site where a dungeon gate seems to have opened. As Sung Jin-woo arrives there, everyone greets him happily. Another guy asked if Sung Jin-woo is a strong hunter, and he is told Jin-woo is the weakest hunter. Others are happy seeing Jin-woo as he is proof that this raid is gonna be easy. As the raid starts, we see a blue jacket hunter called Song Chi-yeol calling for everyone's attention and announcing that he will be the leader. The other hunters didn't mind that as he was the strongest hunter there and agreed to it. As the other hunter fights the monster, we see Jin-woo getting healed by Lee Ju-hee. When Lee Ju-hee asks why Jin-woo is a hunter, he hides the reason for it and tells it's fun being hunter. At the end of the raid, the magic crystal is distributed which can be obtained after killing a monster in the dungeon. As Jin-woo is sighing while looking at his share, someone shouts that he sees another entrance. As the Chi-yeol looks at the entrance, he calls everyone's attention. As the Chi-yeol asks for a vote, it ends up in a tie, making Jin-woo the tiebreaker. Thinking about his family, Jin-woo agrees to raid the dungeon. As the raid group walked toward the boss's room, Jin-woo apologized to Ju-hee as she had to tag along because Sung Jin-woo agreed to raid. Ju-hee scolded him for trying to do something so dangerous when he barely survived the last mob encounter. Seeing him depressed over it, she tells him to take her out to eat after the raid. When they reach a big door which is unusual to see in dungeons. Though skeptical at first, they open the door and enter the dungeon. After entering the door, torches start to light up, showing a huge room with multiple statues. Chi-yeol finds a magic seal and suddenly someone calls him saying he found writing and asks him to look at it. The stone tablet was on the runic text stating the commandments of Temple of Karthanon. As Chi-yeol is reading the stone tablet, Ju-hee calls Jin-woo saying she saw the eyes of the statue move. As soon as Chi-yeol finished reading, the door behind them shuts down. As one hunter tries to go out of the locked door, he gets killed by the statue guarding the door. As others are too scared to process what happened clearly and start panicking, Jin-woo remembers Ju-hee telling him that the eye of the big statue had moved. Jin-woo noticed that the statue was indeed staring at them. Others are scared to see the statue moving and wonder if all the statues in the room are monsters. Jin-woo sees the eyes of the big one light up. Jin-woo grabs Ju-hee and shouts for everyone to get down and jump down with Ju-hee. Although most hunters survive, a few were killed because they were unable to react. Others get the sense back, but Ju-hee was still panicking. Chi-yeol tells that only people that were standing were killed. As Jin-woo tries to stop the bleeding of Chi-yeol's arm, Chi-yeol tells that the big statue might be an S-rank monster. Kim believes the large statue monster must be the lord who was implied in the tablet. Chi-yeol knew that the statue was too strong to beat in a fight and wanted to find an escape route. One of the hunters who was confident in his speed tried to run to the door at his top speed, but he was vaporized by the monster's laser. Even though the monster could easily kill everyone, Sung questioned why it wasn't attacking. Suddenly he remembered that the tablet had rules. Jin-woo asks Chi-yeol for the rule on the tablet as soon as he realizes it. When Jin-woo said the first rule was to worship the Lord, Jin-woo slowly turns toward the Lord and tries to test them. He slowly stands up, and when he reaches a certain height, Lord's eyes start to light up. Jin-woo realized the statue didn't want them to stand against him. Jin-woo shouts for everyone to worship the statue. Chi-yeol understood that Jin-woo had understood something. Jin-woo tells that the statue didn't want anyone to stand up to it and it will kill them if they tried. Everyone follows it, hoping they might survive. Seeing them bow, the Lord smiles and surprises everyone. One of the hunters stands to see if the statue would still attack. As everyone is happy thinking it is over, the statue suddenly stands up. Jin-woo instructs everyone to follow the rule, and the next rule is to give praise to the Lord. A hunter approaches the statue and begins praising it. The statue continues to approach and steps on the hunter, who praised another lord instead of the monster. Panicking, all the hunters started running. Not knowing what to do, they disperse around the room. Every time a hunter reaches a statue, they are assaulted and killed. While running, Chi-yeol comes across a statue. Instead of killing him, begins to play an instrument. Seeing that, Kim Song understood what praising the Lord meant and shouted for everyone to find a statue with an instrument. Other hunters start getting to a statue with an instrument that starts playing, but the statue where Jin-woo and Lee Ju-hee are doesn't. Jin-woo realizes it's one statue per person. Jin-woo leaves Lee Ju-hee to find himself a statue. Jin-woo was sprinting at the statue that appeared to have an instrument, but it turned out to be a shield. The statue slams the shield into the ground, narrowly missing Jin-woo. Jin-woo crawled. He came close to a statue that began singing, saving him from the Lord. As soon as the praising finishes, Ju-ji comes to find him and gasps when she sees him missing a leg. While trying to heal Jin-woo, Ju-hee overexerts herself, coughing up blood. Other members discuss how Jin-woo was fortunate to survive, and how the raid team of 17 was reduced to only 6. One of the hunters accuses Chi-yeol of taking the boss without informing the association, which Chi-yeol admits to. The Lord moves again and raises an altar. While others are confused, Jin-woo tells it's a sacrificial altar and the last rule was to prove your piety toward the god. Others realize they must sacrifice someone, and Kim Sang-shik draws the blade and points it at Chi-yeol, who was the person who brought everyone to the boss room. Chi-yeol agrees and starts walking to the altar to see the flame light. Confused, Jin-woo asks for help to get to the altar. When Hunter helps them get there, 3 more flame light up. Jin-woo asks if help will arrive if they wait, but the Chi-yeol just says the reinforcement will only arrive after the statue gets out. Because it had been a week since the dungeon had opened, if they failed, the statue would escape. Jin-woo urges everyone to the altar, believing that doing so will initiate the next phase. As soon as everyone is on the altar, a spark appears, surrounding them in a second set of blue flames, and the door opens. The statue slowly moves toward them, scaring hunters again. Jin-lee discovers that statues only move when no one is looking at them and asks everyone not to close their eyes and continue staring at them. A female hunter panics from a statue stomping behind her and runs toward the door. But this time Hunter doesn't die. Seeing her survive, everyone is surprised. Jin-woo sees the blue flame go out with time while the yellow flame corresponds to the number of hunters on the altar. He thinks that the open door is the trap. It seems to Hunter goes through, the more the door closes. And when all yellow flames are gone, the door would close. Another hunter runs out of the altar and goes through the door. Jin-woo shouted for others to not leave, as any more would create blind spots where the statue can move. The Chi-yeol asks what they are supposed to do, and Jin-woo say all they have to do is keep looking at the statue till the blue flames all go out. Kim Sang-shik thanks Jin-woo as he was the reason everyone there survived, but apologies as he runs out of the room, extinguishing another yellow flame, leaving behind a sword. Chi-yeol understood that if everyone leave the altar, door would close full, and asked Ju-hee to carry Jin-woo out of the altar. Having used too much mana, Ju-hee was too exhausted to even stand up. Jin-woo asks the Chi-yeol to take Ju-hee as he can't carry her with one of his legs gone. Though the Chi-yeol disagree, Jin-lee just tells him that there is no time. Ju-hee tries to convince Chi-yeol to take Jin-woo instead. Jin-woo just hands Ju-hee the magic stone and tells her to buy dinner, as they promise to go for dinner together. Before Ju-hee could say anything, Chi-yeol knocks her out and leaves. Being the last one there, Jin-woo grabs the nearby sword and thinks to take at least one of them down with him. When Jin-woo taunts it, a statue with a spear attacks, piercing him, and flies up till the top of the altar. As Jin-woo is bleeding out, he thinks of everything that had happened and wishes he had one more chance. As a statue tries to give the finishing blow, the last blue flame goes out, stopping the attack. Jin-woo sees a game-like screen notifying him that he has satisfied all the conditions for a secret quest, Courage of the Weak, and obtained the right to be a player. After accepting, Jin-woo began to shine, disappearing in the bright light. The first thing Jin-woo sees as he gains consciousness is a notification congratulating him on being a player. After waking up, Jin-woo looked around in panic to find himself in a hospital bed. As Jin-woo is getting his sense together, he is called by a person from the Korean Hunter Association's surveillance department. After they got notified by the survivor, White Tiger Guild with surveillance department staff went to the boss's room to find it empty, with Jin-woo at the altar unconscious. Judging by the testimony of the survivor, the association believes that Jin-woo could only have survived by reawakening. However, the machine showed he was still an E rank. After checking, they apologized for troubling him and leaves. Jin-woo checks his body. When Sung Jin-woo tries to interact with the notification screen, his sister Sung Jin-ah visits him. While Jin-ah is scolding him for always taking dangerous work and getting hurt, Jin-woo sees a message pop up in the notification screen. Jin-woo asked his sister Jin-ah if she could see the notification screen, but only he could see it. After the sister leaves, Jinwoo checks the message to find out about the player's growth support system and plenty if he fails to comply. Jinwoo is given the daily quest list, but he doesn't trust it and falls asleep. When the timer for the daily quest runs out, Jinwoo is suddenly sent to a desert area. At first, Jinwoo isn't sure if he was in a dream or not. He sees a monster centipede rise behind him and notification tells him this was a penalty quest and he had to survive 3 hours against it. After somehow surviving the penalty quest, he is sent back to the hospital room. He sees the penalty quest complete screen and the reward for completing it, as he was exhausted by the penalty quest and loses consciousness again. From the next day onward, Jinwoo begins to complete the daily quest. After 4 days of following the system, Jinwoo finds out that the system is real and only he can see it. As a reward for the daily quest, he receives condition recovery that takes away his fatigue, ability points for status, and random box items. He leaves the hospital and goes ladder leading to the subway holding a key he got from a random item box. Though he isn't sure if this game-like system was part of Reawakening, but still thinks that it's worth a try and enters an instant dungeon using the key. The moment he crossed the gate closes, trapping him. He is notified that he can't leave the dungeon unless he kills the boss or used an item called Hearthstone. He is worried since he can barely manage an E-ranked monster. He slowly walks through and smells a strong stench and turns around to find a beast monster jumping toward him. He dodges and sees the name of the monster Steelfang Raikan. While dodging, he finds that his body feels light. Raikan tries to bite him, but he punched it right through the shutter, surprising himself by his strength. The Raikan comes out unhurt and starts attacking again. He fights back but finds out that the monster still outclasses him and begins to dodge. He analyzes the situation and thinks that he needs a weapon to beat Raikan. Remembering the system, he calls for inventory and pulls out Kim Sang-shik's sword and slashes the Raikan in half. With a weapon in hand, he gets ready to fight the approaching monsters. One of the monsters nearly breaks the sword with its jaw, but he manages to kill it. Another monster slowly steps back into the darkness. He checks his status and sees that he gained 1 stat point from LV up and 3 from dailies, and notices that all his stat grows by 1 due to LV up. Sung Jinwoo checks the dead Raikan body to find out that it was missing a magical stone but gives out an item instead. He checks if the system has anything like a store to find it does exist, but he doesn't have access to buy anything due to level. As he thinks about what to do with the dungeon, he sees that the Raikan that disappeared before had brought monsters to him. Jinwoo starts fighting and slowly gets surrounded and attacked from all sides. He keeps fighting, slashing Raikans all around him without giving up, gaining the title of Wolf Slayer. After clearing the monster from his area, he begins walking to see more monsters coming toward him. After killing all the monsters again, Jinwoo notices that the sword had gone dull. With the help of the sword and his title that buff EXP gained from a wolf type of monster, Jinwoo had cleared all the monsters in the area, gaining items along with a Hearthstone. He starts thinking about going back to Hearthstone but rejects it, thinking he might not get a chance like this again easily. Putting the Hearthstone into inventory, he starts walking along the path, killing monsters in the path, gaining level, and growing stronger. He notices that the dungeon was like a game with unlimited monsters but set pattern as well. After killing the spawned monster, Jinwoo notices that the color of the monster's name changes with the strength of the monster relative to his strength. The monster that was orange turned white, showing Jinwoo had grown stronger than when he started. Jinwoo thinks about going to the boss as his level had stopped growing and his weapon would hold out for much longer. He slowly goes down the stairs, thinking if it was Hapjeong Station. After reaching the bottom, he sees a monster attacking him at high speed. He manages to defend using the sword but breaks it in the process. When Jinwoo looks up, he sees that the boss monster was a serpent called Swamp Ruler Poisonous Blue Rasaka. He analyzes the monster while defending against the Swamp Ruler. While deflecting its attack, dodging and getting hit, Jinwoo thinks of his past as the weakest hunter. He remembers how before the strength of the Lord all they could do was kneel and bow. Remembering it, he tells himself again he needs to become stronger. He thinks that compared to the fear he felt toward the Lord, this was nothing. Narrowly dodging, he tries to strike, but the Swamp Ruler turns around sharply and tries to bite him. He barely dodges but loses the sword. He grabs the Swamp Ruler close to the head and begins to bear hug. Jinwoo put all the stats points to his strength stats and starts to crush the neck. The Swamp Ruler begins to thrash around to get Jinwoo off him, to no avail. The swamp ruler dies, being unable to shake Jinwoo off. Sung Jinwoo lay there with the body of the boss, thinking he might have grown stronger. The system notifies Sung Jinwoo that the boss is dead and tells him that he got the purified venom of the boss and a dagger made from its fang. After looking over the loots, Jinwoo is notified that the dungeon is closing with the death of the boss. The area around him shifts into the normal-looking Hapjeong station. He starts walking out when a soldier notices him and asks if he didn't hear the broadcast. After getting a closer look, Soder understood that Jinwoo was a hunter and tries to guide him. As they are going, Jinwoo notices the destruction and monsters and guesses a dungeon break might have occurred, releasing the monsters. Due to his recent level up, Jinwoo's senses are sharpened, and he notices where the boss was located. At the location, we see a huge golem fighting against hunters while the soldier tries to evacuate the civilians. On the side, Jinwoo notices Lee Ju-hee. The other hunter shouts for Lee Ju-hee to use heals, but she was spacing out for some reason. Ju-hee keeps getting flashes of Lord every time she looks at the golem, increases her anxiety. Jinwoo notices Ju-hee hasn't still overcome her trauma of the double dungeon. Jinwoo inspects that the golem is a D-rank boss monster and thinks that he should be able to lower its defense with a strong blow, and then he throws the broken sword with his full strength.